Over this past year with you, I have been doing everything I can to steep myself and really make myself available to read and learn about the history of our congregation, the things that make us who we are, that make us tick, the things that we love and make our collective hearts sing. Of course, one of the things tends to be, and it comes up again and again, the performances that have been done right here on this chancel in many years past. And I heard about them over the years from Matt Rawl, a friend of mine who is not a stranger to a lot of you. He was a youth director here in years past, but there's a group of our congregation that will be traveling up to Shreveport this Friday night to see him perform in the role of God in Children of Eden. And you may remember that, at least those that have been here for a bit, Bob Smith played that role a long time ago, and there are many others of you that probably had some hand in it. And though it'll be my first time seeing this musical in person, I've been looking at some of the music and have been sent parts of the script, and I'm seeing that this performance, just like so many that speak to things that are true, speak about God even in a way that Scripture cannot quite communicate, in God's intimacy with us. The intimacy I'm talking about is one where it's not just that God set the world into motion and all of creation within and around, but it is an intimacy where God knows every part of us, within and without, behind and before. God knows our gifts as human beings and the parts of us that will touch the world in powerful ways. And God knows those parts of us that continue to be tripping points, continue to be things that bring us into this hospital for sinners, if you will. Those attachments that hold us down and those addictions that can sometimes wreck our life. If we're honest, you and I can probably admit, if we're taking an honest account, an audit of our lives, our minds, that we are all addicted in some way to something. For some of us, it's alcohol or food. Others, it's gambling or spending money when you need some point of levity or some sense of being able to have new in your closet or in your world. Or for some of us, the addictions are even more serious and often silent in a world where those addictions are hard at times to detect and care for those around us for whom they bind. Some addictions can even be good things, virtuous things that go on overdrive, like addiction to work, for instance, or addiction to socializing because we find ourselves afraid to be alone with our thoughts or being left behind. This whole notion of the FOMO deal today, the fear of missing out that a couple generational groups talk a lot about, it is a real thing that has more import and influence over our lives than a lot of us can even see or name. That's one of the many reasons why men and women across the United States, each and every one of us, are probably having a harder time finding the rest, the sleep, the rejuvenating experience for energy that they need to live. Our world is full to the brim of stimulation, from bright lights and big screens and alert messages and media in every direction we look. It's no wonder that it's said that even those that have hard effects from the sleep medication that they take, their instances of going into the ER are up 220%, it is said, over the past 5 years. This And all of its residual effects are not just a mental problem, not just a physical problem, even they are a spiritual problem. And it is one that has practical implications for life, and it is certainly one that the church is not talking about. We are not talking about amongst each other enough. We who are called to speak truth when the world cannot accept it. We who are called to break the cycle and become a part of the solution rather than continue to perpetuate the problem. So when a question about Sabbath came up, when we were asking for requests, they asked, what is it? Where does it come from? I said, good, this is going to be great to dive into this today. And I hope that this is a conversation that we can continue in the future. Because when you think about Sabbath, you probably maybe think about Jewish folks that are celebrating in little cloistered groups on their own on the weekend, but it is a practice that Christians indeed are called to uphold. And when we don't, it can have pretty severe consequences. 15 years ago, I'll be a little vulnerable, I found myself as a green, kind of fresh pastor right out of the crop from seminary, plucked into a first congregation up in North Louisiana. And it was my first Advent. For those that don't know what Advent it is that preparation time leading up to Christmas. And of course, in that time, I wanted to be as engaged and connected as I possibly could. So in my mid-20s, I found myself going to 14 Sunday school classes, and I was getting up early to do all of the reflective studies and to be present at all of the kids' different performances and presentations at school. I was in it, right? And then I found myself on Christmas Eve feeling this deep pain in the right side of my back, and it continued to grow through the holiday. And it happened to be, as I went to the doctor finally, because it was just too searing, it ended up in my young life being my first case of shingles. An experience that really most people are not supposed to have until they're long retired. But it was an experience that came from all of the internalized stress that had not had a moment to breathe or to be let free from my own body. And so the only option it had was to direct it in the places it could live. I went to a counselor, and this person heard my story, was hearing about everything that was happening in my precious single life, where I thought I had so much to do. Little did I know. Later, right? But this counselor had every good intention with her 1 hour meeting, and at the end she prescribed me some medicine that didn't have a label on it. She said simply, "Pastor, you need to observe more Sabbath." And I said, well, great, that was totally worth $100, right? But it really can be that simple. I've found that often when we find ourselves so strung out and worn out and coming to the very end of ourselves, it is less about the tasks we do and the time that we don't take. It is more about the existential and internal spiritual reality that is driving all of that stuff that happens in our everyday lives. See if this reflects any of your honest internal reality as it does mine. An addiction, not just to work, but to being worth something in the world. An addiction to proving that you and I are meant to be here, that we were intended to exist. An addiction to being liked, to receiving validation from anything that we can accomplish, an addiction to activity where it becomes harder and harder to face ourselves in the dark, in the mirror, in sheer silence for fear of what we might discover there. It's taken me a lifetime to see that in my own mind and heart, gut and soul. It has taken that lifetime lesson to be able to say today with any level of true belief and integrity that I am worth whatever time it takes to be reminded of our own cherishedness. You know, it's easy to be tempted to value the way we spend our time in the same way entities all around us do. I saw a story about during World War II, Britain and its government, as complicated it is between the Crown and Parliament, was so desperate to keep track of resources to fight the war that it created what we know now today as the GDP, gross domestic product, to value everything that human beings within their country would do. So, for example, women who would draw water and tend the sick and feed children, very little to no value at all. But when you had people going to military school to become a soldier, an employed pilot ordered to bomb a community deemed sympathetic to a rebel cause, a great deal had to be done to rebuild destroyed buildings. So all of those construction workers and architects and soldiers to police the area, to bury the dead, all of those ways of using time were valued greatly. What is it, this paradox we find ourselves living in today, this foundation of what our world values? What is it that makes us so tempted to take those as the very easy formula that will bring about a meaningful, productive, valuable, and transformative life? This equation of consuming things and people in space rather than spending time with the one who created time in the first place. For many of us in the modern world, our understanding of time is based on what we can get out of it, however we can juice that turnip for its best end. Time has a utilitarian function in our lives, and of course, we get it honestly. Even in the Methodist Christian tradition, one of the most famous disciplines and beliefs of John Wesley, not exactly biblical, but it was meant for good. He always said, don't trifle away time. It was a sign of deep faithfulness when we would use every minute with its greatest intention. It has been said the one human resource every single one of us has the same of is time. You can't create more of it, you can't manufacture it, and you actually can't take someone's time with someone ceding their own human agency to give it away. If you and I practice Sabbath as it is demonstrated in the Bible in all of its forms, you'll find yourself relating to time in a completely different way. Not just resting and kicking back like we think about it, but it is truly pulling away from all of the way that the world values productivity and seeing the productive value of tending our own creatureliness. The fact that we have much less power than we might give ourselves credit for, that we actually, as much as we like to dupe ourselves to see differently, we cannot save the world or our own problems by ourselves, no matter how hard we work, and that there will always be things left undone. And that doesn't always have to be bad news. It is a wilderness, a desert place of its own making, one where only God knows the way to bring us home. Some of you may be wondering why we read such a long text today. Billy did a beautiful job, and I thought it'd be okay because, Mark is actually pretty brief in the way he uses sentences. But it is a lectionary text today, and it really talks about two miracles. But what I'm interested in is not primarily the miracles of Jesus and Jesus' healing, but what happens in the gaps, in the in-between. Have you ever noticed the pattern that he demonstrates just in these two events that are given voice by the gospel writer Mark? You see these gaps of Jesus going by himself to a mountaintop to pray, of Jesus going to a desert place and inviting his friends, his servants, his followers, his apostles, disciples in their own leadership and service along with him. He's hearkening them into this practice that has been set in motion since the very beginning of God's time, where God created, we believe, for 6 days, and then at the seventh, God rested and said it was good. I could use all sorts of different texts that might seem better than this one, like the law of the 10 Commandments coming down, talking about keeping the Sabbath and making it holy, all of the different ways that Sabbath comes out through the words of the Psalms, talking about be still and know that I am God. You could even use the other piece from the Gospel of Mark in chapter 2, where it talks about Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath, as Jesus breaks the rules of human beings again and again. But in today's gospel, we see the pattern demonstrated where he gives that permission. And really, he lives out the intention of God to break into human history and remind us what we as human beings completely forget again and again. He talks about a healthy rhythm of action and contemplation. That in all the action that we focus on and in all of the ways that Jesus commands and offers miracles to the great crowds that are relentless and never ending, just like our commitments and our work and every opportunity perhaps is relentless and unending. Jesus teaches by what he does, not just what he invites, asks, and says. He finds a way to do this that is not just resting or just acting, but they are intricately related and connected. They cannot be unbound from each other. And his power is an outgrowth of this pulling away. Not only a healing for others, but a healing for the servants to serve. I have a hunch that part of what Jesus was doing was reframing and breaking the cycle that continued to be operative in these disciples from the story that was theirs by their adoption of God. Each of these disciples may not have a direct line and blood lineage to Abraham or Moses. They may not be able to track that back, but they were grafted into the life of God in a way that God's story and God's people's story were their story, in all of its glory and in all of its trauma. We think about the story that was continued to be told by the Jewish people even 2,000 years ago as this story of Jesus continues to give voice. And they were living still those times of the Exodus where the Hebrew slaves had to remember what it was like to see themselves as valuable outside of what bricks they could produce every day. Every day the same, days that were laden with despair because there was no dynamic of rest or relief. And when they left that life, it was so hard to understand then. Now what? What does it mean to be a human being? In his work, How to Be Here, Rob Bell rightly says, even though they, generations ago, our ancestors, they get out of Egypt, it takes a while to get Egypt out of them. And so if you've done any looking and work on trauma, you know, as the book, The Body Keeps the Score says, that those who continue to live out those hard stories of life, they organize their lives, we organize our lives as if the trauma were still going on, unchanged, immutable, as if every new encounter or event is contaminated by the past. Wonder about you, me, us, 2,000 years later. Have you ever felt like you can't distinguish one of your days from the next? Have you ever felt like you're a number, a cog in a wheel, a slave to life's machine? Like how you think about yourself cannot be separated from what you do? Like your worth, your self-esteem are way too caught up in how many bricks or whatever units of production you are creating? These are signs, friends, that we are in improper relationship with creation, with the land, even with our own bodies. You know, it's pretty complicated how Sabbath came to be, but as Cliff Notes a version as I can give it, particularly after creation in Exodus, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, you see the growth of these rules around protecting the Sabbath, helping to order people's lives so that they can have permission and a picture of what it looks like to step away from the usual trappings of what it is to be useful to God. They talk about in the 7th year, the land is to have a Sabbath rest, letting the land lie fallow from the crops that are grown to feed communities the rest of the 6 years in that time. And in that 7th year, creation is given a respite. And at that time, it wasn't just the land, it was human beings too. It was meant for the poor. It was meant for those that had such insurmountable debt that they would never be able to get from under it. That in that 7th year, even in that Jubilee time, they were forgiven and offered a chance to begin again. These laws are called Shemitah, which basically means release. Release whatever you are holding. Release whatever is in your possession, whether it is a plot of land, whether it is a moment in time, and release it from your need to provide for you. This can still happen with us, too. Sabbath is a window into God's kingdom, a foretaste of heaven in a way that we can't find in any other place. We find ourselves in the despair of our daily going and coming when life feels like it is just flat. Sabbath reminds us of a bigger, more hopeful picture. It is a purposeful rest that can really be the most productive thing we can do. Sabbath is a day where we act like the work is done, even if it isn't. Sabbath is when we spend the day remembering the efficiency and production are not God's highest goals for our life. Joy is. Love is. Experiencing the depth of grace is. Sabbath is when you let whatever you've pushed down rise to the surface. Sabbath is a day when things that are broken or torn within us get fixed, get mended, and begin the road to being made whole once again. Wayne Muller, in his book Sabbath, said, during this experience, this practice of Sabbath, we stop producing. We stop counting. How do we count friendship or laughter? How do we count honesty or the smell of bread from the oven? How do we count the value of a sunrise, the clasp of a child's hand, or a lover's touch? So many truly precious things only grow in the soil of time. Friends, today, I hope that this isn't just a mindful exercise, that out of your time together today, whether it be as you ride home or as you find a quiet moment in the afternoon, write down for yourself maybe one commitment that you will try just in this next month, as so much of our rhythms of life and back to school are beginning again. You might say, I can hear it now in your brains, oh, there's just so much going on, I can't take a day. That may be true for now. Let's take one step forward and maybe take an hour. Maybe take half of a day. Maybe commit to leave work early for 1 or 2 hours every afternoon to make up that time to remember yours and my own creatureliness. No phone, no computer, no connection, just attention and gratitude. Let go of those familiar addictions that bind you and me. Today, may we reconnect to the abiding love of God that desires to guide us in the way that leads to life, to allow the grace of God to wash over us and remind us of what joy truly can be. May we listen for the voice that lovingly calls our name and invites us to see the world once again in its blessedness, reminded that our place within it is very, very good. May it be so. In the name of God, amen.